Zara dropped her lunchbox. The metal container clattered against the frozen pavement, the sound echoing through the narrow alley behind the convenience store. She froze. Someone was there. A weak coughing sound came from behind the stack of plastic crates. Zara slowly stepped closer, her heart pounding. "Hello?" No answer. Another cough. She moved the crates aside and gasped. A boy. He couldn't have been older than 9. His cheeks were pale, his lips were cracked. His thin jacket looked like it hadn't seen warmth in weeks. And his eyes, they were fixed on the lunchbox she had just dropped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The winter wind blew through the alley, biting at Zara's face. She slowly picked up the lunchbox and sat on the ground a few feet away from him. "You can come closer," she said softly. The boy didn't move. His voice finally came out hoarse and weak. "I'm not stealing." Zara frowned. "I didn't say you were." He stared at the lunchbox again. The silence stretched between them. Then Zara opened the container. Inside was the same simple lunch her mother packed every day. Rice, kimchi, a boiled egg. She picked up the egg. Without saying anything, she broke it perfectly in half. She held one half toward him. The boy hesitated. "You can take it," she said. His hand moved slowly, like he was afraid the moment would disappear. When he finally grabbed it, he ate it in 2 bites. Zara blinked. "Were you that hungry?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he looked away, embarrassed. So Zara pushed the lunchbox toward him. "Eat." His eyes widened. "All of it?" Zara shook her head. "We'll share." He stared at her for a long moment. Then he began eating. Not fast, not greedy, but carefully, like someone who wasn't sure when the next meal would come. After a few minutes, Zara asked quietly, "What's your name?" The boy swallowed. "Jun-Seok. I'm Zara." He nodded slightly. The wind blew harder, and Zara hugged her coat tighter. Jun-Seok noticed. "You should go," he said suddenly. "Why?" "It's cold." Zara pointed at his thin jacket. "So, why aren't you leaving?" Jun-Seok didn't answer. Instead, he stared at the ground. Zara realized something. "You don't have a home, do you?" Silence. That silence was all the answer she needed. She stood up, brushing the snow off her skirt. "Okay." Jun-Seok looked confused. "Okay, what?" "I'll bring extra food tomorrow." His head snapped up. "You don't have to do that." "I know, but I will." She closed the lunchbox and walked away. After a few steps, she turned back. Jun-Seok was still sitting there, staring at the empty half of the egg in his hand. That night, Zara couldn't stop thinking about him. At dinner, her mother noticed her quietness. "Zara, are you sick?" "No." "Then, why aren't you talking?" Zara hesitated, then asked softly, "Mum, what happens to kids who don't have families?" Her mother paused. "Why are you asking that?" "No reason." Her mother sighed. "Life becomes very hard for them." Zara looked down at her plate. Very hard. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and she made a decision. The next afternoon, she ran to the same alley. Jun-Seok was there. He looked surprised. "You came back." Zara lifted her lunchbox. "I said I would." Inside was double the food. Jun-Seok's eyes widened again. "You're going to get in trouble." "Probably. So why do it?" Zara shrugged. "Because someone should." Jun-Seok stared at her like she had just said the strangest thing in the world. And maybe she had. From that day on, it became their secret routine. Every afternoon. Same alley, same lunchbox. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just ate quietly. Weeks turned into months. Jun-Seok slowly began to change. His face looked healthier. His voice grew stronger. One afternoon, he asked her something unexpected. "Why are you helping me?" Zara thought for a moment, then said, Because one day, someone might need your help too. Jun-Seok looked at her carefully. Do you think that will happen? Zara smiled. I hope so. If you're enjoying this story so far, pause for just a second and hit the like button. It helps the video reach more people who love emotional stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Now here's where things start to change. Because one snowy afternoon, Jun-Seok said something that would stay in Zara's mind for the next 22 years. They had just finished eating when Zara pulled something from her pocket, a thin red thread bracelet. My grandma gave this to me, she said. Jun-Seok looked curious. Why? She said red thread connects people who are meant to meet. Jun-Seok laughed quietly. That sounds like a fairy tale. Maybe. Zara pulled the bracelet apart, snapping the thread in two. She tied one piece around his wrist, then tied the other around hers. Now, we won't forget. Jun-Seok stared at the thread. Forgetting what? That we met. Jun-Seok looked at her seriously. Then he said something she didn't expect. When I grow up, he tightened the thread on his wrist. I'm going to come back for you. Zara laughed. Why? Jun-Seok looked her straight in the eyes. Because one day I'll be someone important. Zara shook her head, smiling. Then you better remember where this alley is. Jun-Seok nodded slowly. Oh, I will. Neither of them knew it yet, but that promise would change both their lives forever, and tomorrow everything would fall apart. Zara ran into the alley the next afternoon so fast that she nearly slipped on the ice. Jun-Seok, she called. No answer. She frowned. He was always there before her, always sitting on the same overturned crate, waiting quietly like a shadow no one else noticed. But today the alley was empty. Zara stepped farther inside. Jun-Seok? Only the wind answered. Her chest tightened. Maybe he was late. She sat on the crate and waited. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, still nothing. Finally, she stood up and checked behind the crates, behind the dumpster, even around the corner of the building. Nothing. The next day she came again. Still nothing. On the third day, she asked the store owner, Excuse me, have you seen a boy around here? The old man squinted. What boy? He sits behind the store sometimes. The man shrugged. Police came 2 days ago. Picked up a street kid. Zara's stomach dropped. Police? Yeah, social. Workers too. Took him somewhere. Where? The man shook his head. Don't know. Zara walked away slowly. The lunchbox in her hand suddenly felt heavy. That afternoon she still went to the alley. She waited. An hour, 2 hours. But Jun-Seok never came back. Days turned into weeks. Eventually, the snow melted, but the empty crate stayed empty. Zara stopped bringing 2 lunches. Yet every time she passed that alley, she looked, just in case. She still wore the red thread bracelet. Years passed. Life moved forward, whether she was ready or not. Her father worked long hours at the port in Incheon, unloading cargo ships through freezing winters and scorching summers. One night, he came home exhausted and sat heavily at the table. Zara noticed his hand shaking. Dad, are you okay? He forced a smile. Just tired. But 3 months later, the phone rang at midnight. Her mother answered and collapsed. A crane accident at the docks. Zara's father never came home again. Life became harder overnight. Her mother took 2 jobs. Zara helped raise her younger brother and sister. Sometimes she skipped meals so they could eat. Sometimes she stayed up late studying while everyone else slept. One night, her younger brother asked, Zara, why do you study so much? She smiled tiredly. Because one day I want to help people. Who? Zara paused. She remembered a boy with cold hands and hungry eyes. Kids who feel invisible. Years later, Zara moved to Seoul for university. She studied social work. While other students chased high-paying careers, Zara volunteered at shelters and youth centres. One afternoon during training, her professor asked the class, "Why did you choose this field?" Students gave typical answers. To help society. To make a difference. To support vulnerable communities. Then the professor pointed to Zara. "And you?" Zara hesitated, then said, quietly, "Because someone once needed help, and I couldn't find him again." The room fell silent. The professor nodded slowly. "That's a good reason." Meanwhile, in another part of the city, another life was unfolding. Jun-Seok sat alone at a desk in a crowded foster home study room. He was 14 now. The other boys around him laughed loudly, playing games on their phones. But Jun-Seok studied. Math, programming, engineering books far beyond his grade level. One of the older boys leaned over. "Why do you study so much?" Jun-Seok didn't look up. "Because I'm leaving this place." The boy laughed. "Everyone says that." Jun-Seok finally looked up. "But not everyone keeps promises." The boy rolled his eyes. "What promise?" Jun-Seok didn't answer. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a thin red thread bracelet, worn, faded, but still strong. He tightened it around his wrist, then went back to studying. Years passed. Jun-Seok earned a scholarship to a top university in Seoul. Money was tight. Some nights he slept in computer labs. Some nights he ate instant noodles for dinner. But he never complained, because every time he felt like quitting, he remembered the alley and a girl who shared her lunch when she barely had enough herself. One evening, his roommate Minho noticed the bracelet. "You've been wearing that since freshman year." Jun-Seok glanced at it. "Longer than that." "What is it?" "A reminder." "Of what?" Jun-Seok smiled slightly. "That someone believed I mattered." Minho leaned back in his chair. "You're weird." "Probably. But one day," Jun-Seok said quietly, "I'm going to find her again." Minho laughed. "After how many years?" Jun-Seok checked the bracelet. "However long it takes." Fast forward another decade. Seoul, glass skyscrapers, traffic lights glowing against rainy streets. Inside one of the tallest towers, a room full of executives sat around a conference table. At the head of the table sat Jun-Seok, now 31, sharp suit, calm eyes, founder and CEO of one of Korea's fastest-growing technology companies. An executive finished a presentation nervously. "Our platform valuation has officially passed $2 billion. Another executive clapped. "Congratulations, Mr. Park." The room applauded, but Jun-Seok barely reacted. Instead, he stared out the window. Minho, now his business partner, noticed. "You should be celebrating." Jun-Seok shrugged. "I am. You don't look like it." Jun-Seok turned his wrist slowly. The red thread bracelet was still there. Minho sighed. "Still thinking about that girl?" Jun-Seok smiled faintly. "Every day." Minho leaned forward. "You realize Seoul has 10 million people, right?" "I know." "And you only remember her first name." "I know." "And that she was Nigerian." "I know." "So how exactly do you plan to find her?" Jun-Seok looked out at the city lights. "By changing the places she might be." Minho blinked. "That's the most confusing thing you've ever said." Jun-Seok stood up. "Start investing in youth housing projects." Minho frowned. "That's charity." "Good. And immigrant community centers?" Minho stared at him. "You're serious?" Jun-Seok nodded. "If she's still helping people, She'll show up somewhere. Minho shook his head slowly. You're building an entire social program just to find one girl. Jun-Seok smiled. No. He looked at the bracelet again. I'm keeping a promise. And somewhere across Seoul, a woman named Zara Adeyemi was about to walk into his life again, without either of them knowing it. But what happens next? No one could have predicted. And trust me, the reunion won't happen the way you expect. If you're enjoying this story so far, take 1 second to like the video and subscribe, because the next part is where fate finally begins to move. Just not in the way either of them imagined. Zara slammed the file down on the desk. This can't be right. Across from her, a tired-looking caseworker rubbed his temples. I wish it wasn't. Zara leaned forward. So, you're telling me this boy has been sleeping in subway stations for 3 weeks, and no one noticed? The man sighed. Zara, we're handling hundreds of cases. That's not an excuse. She grabbed the file again and flipped through the pages. 16 years old. No parents, no permanent address, no school. Her jaw tightened. Where is he now? Probably the same place as last night. And that is? The caseworker looked embarrassed. Line 2 subway platform. Zara didn't say another word. She grabbed her coat and stormed out. An hour later, she stepped into the noisy underground station. The smell of metal and rain filled the air. People rushed past in every direction. But Zara wasn't looking at the crowd. She was scanning the corners. Then she saw him. A skinny teenage boy sitting against a pillar, hugging his backpack like it was the only thing he owned. Zara walked over slowly. Hey! The boy looked up immediately defensive. I didn't steal anything. Zara blinked. For a moment she was 9 years old again, standing in an alley, hearing those exact same words. She sat down beside him. I didn't say you did. The boy looked confused, then suspicious. Zara pulled something from her bag, a wrapped sandwich. She held it out. Eat. The boy stared at it like it might disappear. You're not a cop? No. You're not from the shelter? No. Then why are you helping me? Zara smiled slightly. Because someone once helped someone I knew. The boy slowly took the sandwich and began eating. Watching that simple moment made something tighten in Zara's chest, because she suddenly realized something. Life had come full circle, but the boy from the alley, Jun-Seok, he was still missing. That night, Zara walked home through the busy streets of Seoul. Her phone buzzed, her co-worker Hana. You left the office without finishing the report. I know. You're impossible sometimes. Zara laughed. Did the boy get a place tonight? Yes. Good. Hana paused. You work too hard, Zara. I'm fine. No, you're not. Zara frowned. What do you mean? Hana hesitated. You help everyone else, but you never talk about your own life. Zara stayed quiet. Then, Hana said gently, don't you ever want something for yourself? Zara looked at the red thread bracelet still tied around her wrist. Faded, thin, but still unbroken. I already got something once, she said softly. I'm just waiting to see if it comes back. Across the city, Jun-Seok was standing on a stage. Bright lights blinded the crowd. Cameras flashed. A reporter spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the youngest CEO in Korean tech history, Mr. Park Jun-Seok. Applause erupted. Jun-Seok walked to the podium calmly. The reporter smiled. Your company just surpassed $3 billion in valuation. How does that feel? Jun-Seok adjusted the microphone. Like a beginning. The crowd laughed. The reporter leaned forward. Most CEOs would call that the finish line. Jun-Seok shook his head. I started this company for a reason. And what reason is that? Jun-Seok paused, then said quietly, to keep a promise. The reporter blinked. A promise? Jun-Seok smiled faintly. One made a long time ago. After the conference ended, Min-ho walked beside him toward the parking garage. You're going to drive the investors crazy with mysterious answers like that. Jun-Seok chuckled. That's their problem. Min-ho suddenly stopped walking. Wait. What? Min-ho pointed across the street. A poster hung on a public board. Community forum supporting immigrant youth. Guest speaker Zara Adeyemi. Jun-Seok didn't notice. He was already unlocking his car. But Min-ho was staring. Jun-Seok. What? Didn't you say the girl you're looking for? Her name was Zara? Jun-Seok froze. Slowly he turned around. What did you say? Min-ho pointed at the poster again. Jun-Seok walked closer. His heart began pounding. Zara Adeyemi. The name stared back at him. For a moment he couldn't breathe. Is it possible? Min-ho asked quietly. Jun-Seok didn't answer. Instead he pulled his sleeve back. The red thread bracelet rested against his wrist. Still there. After 22 years. The forum was 2 nights later. Jun-Seok arrived early. The community centre was simple. Nothing like the luxury halls he was used to. Rows of folding chairs, plain stage, local residents chatting quietly. Jun-Seok sat in the back, waiting. His heart was beating harder than it ever had in any business meeting. Min-ho whispered beside him. What if it's not her? Jun-Seok stared at the stage. Then I keep searching. The room slowly filled. Then the host walked to the microphone. Thank you all for coming tonight. Our next speaker has spent years helping vulnerable youth in this city. Jun-Seok's fingers tightened around the bracelet. The host smiled. Please, welcome Zara Adeyemi. A woman walked onto the stage, confident, calm. Her voice filled the room. When people talk about homeless youth, they usually talk about numbers. Jun-Seok froze. The voice. Older, stronger, but unmistakable. But behind every number is a child who simply needed someone to notice them. Min-ho glanced at him. You okay? Jun-Seok barely whispered. It's her. On stage, Zara continued speaking. When I was young, I once met a boy who had nothing. Jun-Seok's heart nearly stopped. And all he needed that day was someone willing to share. The room listened quietly, but Jun-Seok couldn't hear anything else, because the past was suddenly standing right in front of him. 22 years of searching, and she was only a few meters away. But the real shock was still coming, because Zara was about to say something that would change everything. And Jun-Seok wasn't ready for it. If you're still watching this story, you're about to witness the most emotional moment yet. So before we continue, make sure to like the video and subscribe, because the next part is where fate finally speaks. I never saw him again. Zara's voice softened as she stood on the small stage. The room had gone quiet. But that moment changed the way I saw the world, she continued. Because kindness is strange. Sometimes you give it away, and you never know where it ends up. Jun-Seok felt something tighten in his chest. Her words hit him like a memory that refused to stay buried. Zara continued speaking. That boy probably forgot me a long time ago, Jun-Seok whispered under his breath. I didn't. Min-ho glanced at him. What did you say? Jun-Seok shook his head. On stage, Zara smiled gently at the audience. But the lesson stayed with me. So now I spend my life helping kids who feel invisible. Applause filled the room. The speech ended. People began standing and chatting. Jun-Seok stayed seated. His hands were trembling. Min-ho nudged him. Well, go talk to her. Jun-Seok exhaled slowly. After 22 years, I don't even know what to say. Start with hello. Jun-Seok finally stood. Across the room, Zara was talking to a few volunteers. Jun-Seok walked toward her. Every step felt heavier than the last. What if she didn't remember him? What if she had moved on completely? What if he had spent 2 decades chasing a ghost? He stopped a few feet away. Zara turned slightly. Their eyes met, but there was no recognition. To her, he was just another stranger. "Hello," she said politely. Jun-Seok opened his mouth, but no words came out. Zara tilted her head. "Did you want to ask something?" Jun-Seok's mind raced. 22 years of searching, and the moment had finally arrived. He took a breath. "You used to split the egg in half." Zara blinked. "What?" Jun-Seok said softly. "In the alley behind the convenience store." Zara froze. Jun-Seok slowly rolled up his sleeve. The faded red thread bracelet appeared. Her eyes widened. For a second she didn't move. Then her hands began shaking. "No," Jun-Seok nodded quietly. "It's me." Zara's voice barely came out. "Jun-Seok?" He smiled. Hi, Zara." The world seemed to stop. People were still talking around them. Chairs scraped the floor, but neither of them heard anything. Zara stared at the bracelet, then slowly lifted her own wrist. The other half of the red thread was still there. Thin, old, but unmistakable. Jun-Seok laughed softly in disbelief. "You kept it." Zara shook her head slowly, tears forming. "You actually came back." Jun-Seok's voice was gentle. "I told you I would." Zara suddenly laughed through her tears. "I thought you were joking." "I wasn't." Minho watched the scene from across the room with wide eyes. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Zara wiped her face quickly. "You disappeared." "I know. I waited for weeks." Jun-Seok looked down. "They took me to a foster center." Zara exhaled slowly. "So that's what happened." For a moment neither of them spoke. Then Zara crossed her arms. "So you became someone important after all." Jun-Seok chuckled. "I'm trying." "I heard you're some big CEO now." Jun-Seok shrugged. "Something like that." Zara laughed again. "You look different." Jun-Seok raised an eyebrow. "I hope so." "You were half this height and twice as skinny. And you used to carry a metal lunchbox everywhere." Zara grinned. "I still have it." They both laughed. The tension slowly melted. But Jun-Seok's expression turned serious. "I looked for you." Zara blinked. "You did?" "For years." "How?" "I invested in youth programs." Zara stared at him. "Wait, the new housing project in Guro district?" Jun-Seok nodded. "That was you?" "Yes." Zara stepped back in shock. "That project saved dozens of kids." Jun-Seok smiled softly. "Good." "You built all that just hoping I might show up?" Jun-Seok thought for a moment. "Partly." Zara shook her head in disbelief. "You're crazy." "Probably. But it worked." Zara looked around the community center, then back at him. "Why didn't you say something during my speech?" Jun-Seok shrugged. "I wanted to be sure." "And now?" Jun-Seok held up his wrist. "The bracelet convinced me." Zara smiled warmly. For a moment they simply stood there. 2 lives that had taken completely different paths, now standing face to face again. Then Jun-Seok said something unexpected. "Do you remember what you told me?" Zara frowned. "I told you a lot of things." "You said one day someone might need my help." Zara nodded slowly. "I remember." Jun-Seok looked around the community center. Kids were laughing in the hallway. Volunteers were organizing supplies. "You were right." Zara followed his gaze. "You're helping a lot of people now." Jun-Seok shook his head. "Not enough." Zara crossed her arms. "What do you mean?" Jun-Seok turned back to her. "What if we built something bigger?" Zara raised an eyebrow. "Bigger than this?" "Yes." "How?" Jun-Seok smiled. "Together." Zara looked skeptical. "You barely just found me again." "I know." And already you're planning world domination. Jun-Seok laughed. Not domination. Then what? Jun-Seok glanced at the red thread bracelet again. A promise? Zara tilted her head. I'm listening. Jun-Seok's voice was calm. What if we created a program for kids like we used to be? Zara's expression slowly changed. Kids with nowhere to go. Exactly. Food, housing, education. Jun-Seok nodded. And mentors. Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, You're serious about this? Very. Zara studied his face. You know this would take millions of dollars. Jun-Seok smiled slightly. That's convenient. Zara laughed. You're impossible. But you're thinking about it. She sighed. Of course I am. Jun-Seok leaned closer. Imagine a place where no kid has to sit in an alley waiting for someone to notice them. Zara looked down at her bracelet, then back at him. All right. Jun-Seok blinked. All right. I'll help you. Jun-Seok smiled widely. Really? Zara nodded, but on one condition. What? I run the program. Jun-Seok didn't hesitate. Deal. Zara extended her hand. Jun-Seok shook it, but neither of them knew yet. That decision would soon create something far bigger than either of them imagined. A movement, a story, and a moment that would soon go viral across an entire country. But before that happened, something unexpected would change their relationship forever. And it would start with a simple dinner invitation. If you've made it this far into the story, you're officially part of the journey. So go ahead and like the video and subscribe, because the next part reveals how their small idea turned into something that shocked the entire nation. Leo checked his watch nervously. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But tonight, he was sweating. Minho leaned against the car beside him, smirking. You've been CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company for years, he said. But you look like a teenager about to ask someone to prom. Jun-Seok adjusted his jacket. Be quiet. Minho laughed. She's just a person. Jun-Seok glanced at the restaurant entrance. Not to me. At that moment, the glass doors opened. Zara stepped outside. She looked around until she spotted them. Jun-Seok straightened instantly. Minho whispered, Relax, you're not pitching investors. Zara walked over, smiling. Sorry I'm late. One of the kids at the center refused to go home. Jun-Seok shook his head. You're not late. Minho extended his hand. I'm Minho, the guy who had to listen to him talk about you for 15 years. Zara burst out laughing. 15 years, Jun-Seok groaned. Minho shrugged. What? It's the truth. Zara looked amused. So you've been searching for me that long? Jun-Seok rubbed the back of his neck. Something like that. Zara smiled softly. Well, you finally found me. They entered the restaurant. It wasn't fancy, just a quiet place near the river. Zara noticed immediately. You didn't choose one of those expensive CEO restaurants. Jun-Seok shrugged. You once shared a lunchbox with me in an alley. Zara laughed. Fair point. They sat down. For a few minutes they simply talked. About childhood. About the years they missed. About the strange twists life had taken. At one point, Zara leaned back and studied him carefully. You're really different now. Jun-Seok raised an eyebrow. In a good way? Zara nodded. You look confident. Jun-Seok smiled. You used to scold me for eating too fast. You used to eat like someone might steal your food. Jun-Seok paused. Old habits. Zara's expression softened. I'm glad you survived all that. Jun-Seok met her eyes. I survived because of you. The words hung in the air. Zara looked away slightly. You can't give me all that credit. I can. If I hadn't met you... He stopped himself. Zara leaned forward. What? Jun-Seok shook his head. Nothing. Zara narrowed her eyes. Don't do that. Do what? Start a sentence and not finish it. Jun-Seok chuckled. Fine. He took a breath. If I hadn't met you, I might have stopped trying. Zara's smile faded slightly. You were just a kid. I was a kid who had nothing. Zara stayed quiet. Jun-Seok continued. You gave me the first reason to believe someone cared whether I existed. Zara's eyes glistened. You're going to make me cry in a restaurant. Jun-Seok laughed. That would be awkward. They both smiled. Then Zara changed the subject. So, tell me about this big plan you mentioned. Jun-Seok leaned forward. I want to build a national support program. For who? For kids aging out of foster care. Zara's expression became serious. That's one of the hardest transitions. I know. They lose housing. Exactly. They lose support systems. Jun-Seok nodded. And many end up homeless within a year. Zara folded her arms. You've done your research. Jun-Seok smiled. I had good motivation. Zara thought for a moment. Okay, if we were to build this program, Jun-Seok interrupted gently. When we build it, Zara smirked. Confident, aren't you? I learned from the best. Zara laughed. All right then, Mr. CEO. She grabbed a napkin and a pen. Let's design it. For the next hour, they filled the napkin with ideas. Housing programs, scholarships, job training, counseling, mentorship networks. By the time they finished, the napkin looked like a blueprint. Zara leaned back. You know what? What? This could actually work. Jun-Seok smiled. I know. Zara studied the napkin again. Every program needs a name. Jun-Seok didn't hesitate. The Red Thread Project. Zara looked up slowly. You remembered? Jun-Seok lifted his wrist. How could I forget? Zara nodded. Okay. Jun-Seok blinked. Okay, we'll build it. Jun-Seok grinned. Good. But neither of them expected what would happen next. 3 months later, the Red Thread Project launched its first community centre, and the response shocked everyone. Kids started showing up from everywhere. Within weeks, every bed in the housing program was full. Every training class had waiting lists. One evening, Zara walked into Jun-Seok's office holding a stack of reports. You need to see this. Jun-Seok looked up. What happened? Zara dropped the papers on the desk. 127 youths already enrolled. Jun-Seok raised his eyebrows. That fast? And the retention rate is 89%. Jun-Seok whistled softly. That's incredible. Zara pointed to another page. 45 already placed in stable housing. Jun-Seok leaned back in his chair. 0 return to homelessness. Zara nodded proudly. This is working. Jun-Seok looked at the reports again. You built this. Zara shook her head. We built it. That night, they visited the centre together. Teenagers were studying. Some were cooking dinner in the shared kitchen. Others were laughing in the recreation room. A boy walked up to Zara. Miss Zara, I passed my math test. Zara high-fived him. That's what I'm talking about. Jun-Seok watched quietly. Zara turned to him. What? You're amazing at this. Zara shrugged. I just understand them. Jun-Seok smiled softly. I know. But what neither of them knew was that someone in that building had just recorded a video, a short clip of Zara and Jun-Seok talking with the kids. And within 48 hours, that video would explode across social media. Millions of views, news reporters, television interviews. Suddenly, the entire country wanted to know one thing. Who were the 2 people behind the Red Thread Project? And how did a simple childhood promise create a movement? If you've made it this far, the story is about to reach its most emotional moment yet. So go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Do you believe small acts of kindness really come back years later? Because the final chapter of this story will prove that sometimes they do. The video exploded overnight. It started with a simple 30-second clip. A volunteer had recorded Zara helping a teenage girl fill out a scholarship form while Jun-Seok stood beside them, explaining how the housing program worked. Nothing dramatic, just a normal moment inside the Red Thread Center. But at the end of the clip, the volunteer had asked a simple question. Why did you start this program? Jun-Seok had glanced at Zara before answering. Because 22 years ago, she shared her lunch with a starving boy. The video ended there. Within 12 hours, it had 2 million views. Within 2 days, it had 10 million. News stations began calling. Reporters flooded the community centre. Headlines appeared everywhere. The promise that built a movement. CEO returns to thank the girl who saved him. The Red Thread story inspiring the nation. Zara walked into Jun-Seok's office, holding her phone in disbelief. Have you seen this? Jun-Seok looked up calmly. I've seen it. You're trending on every news channel in Korea. Jun-Seok shrugged. That happens sometimes. Zara stared at him. No, not like this. She held the phone out. Millions of comments filled the screen. People were sharing their own stories. Teachers, former foster kids, social workers, even celebrities. One comment read, "One act of kindness changed 2 lives and now it's changing thousands." Zara exhaled slowly. This is bigger than we expected. Jun-Seok leaned back in his chair. That's good, but also dangerous. Jun-Seok raised an eyebrow. How? Attention brings pressure. Jun-Seok smiled. I run a tech company worth billions. Zara folded her arms. And this program matters more. Jun-Seok didn't argue, because she was right. 3 days later, they were invited to speak at a national youth conference in Seoul. The auditorium was massive. Thousands of people filled the seats. Students, teachers, government officials, journalists. Backstage, Zara paced nervously. I hate public speaking. Jun-Seok laughed. You spoke to a room of angry community leaders last month. That's different. How? They weren't recording every word. Jun-Seok handed her a bottle of water. You'll be fine. Zara stopped pacing. You're suspiciously calm. Jun-Seok smiled. I'm used to stages. Not like this. What do you mean? Zara gestured toward the crowd beyond the curtain. Those people are here because of our story. Jun-Seok thought for a moment. Then, we just tell the truth. The host's voice echoed through the auditorium. Please, welcome the founders of the Red Thread Project, Zara Adeyemi and Park Jun-Seok. Thunderous applause filled the hall. They walked onto the stage together. For a moment, Zara froze. The crowd seemed endless. Jun-Seok whispered, Just talk to me. Zara nodded. She stepped toward the microphone. When I was 9 years old, the room went silent. I met a boy sitting alone behind a convenience store. Jun-Seok watched her quietly. He was hungry, she paused, and I had a lunchbox. The audience leaned forward. Zara smiled slightly. That was it. Some people laughed softly, but then Jun-Seok stepped forward. That small moment saved my life. The room became silent again. Jun-Seok continued. Kindness doesn't look dramatic when it happens. He lifted his wrist slightly. But sometimes it travels farther than we ever expect. The audience erupted into applause. Later that night, Zara sat on the steps outside the conference hall. Jun-Seok joined her. You were amazing up there. Zara shrugged. I just told the truth. Jun-Seok looked at the city lights. You realize what's happening, right? What? Other cities want to copy the program. Zara blinked. How many? Jun-Seok smiled. 34 so far. Zara laughed in disbelief. You're joking. I wish I was. Zara leaned back on the steps. From 1 lunchbox to 34 cities. Jun-Seok nodded. Life is weird. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Zara glanced at him. You know something? What? You never told me why you kept the bracelet. Jun-Seok looked down at his wrist. Because it reminded me that someone once believed I mattered. Zara smiled softly. You always mattered. Jun-Seok looked at her. And now you're helping thousands of kids believe the same thing. Zara chuckled. Look at us. What? 2 kids from a freezing alley running a national movement. Jun-Seok laughed. That does sound ridiculous. Zara nudged him. You're the billionaire, CEO. I'm just the social worker. Jun-Seok shook his head. No. What? You're the reason any of this exists. Zara looked down shyly. Jun-Seok hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, There's something else I've been thinking about. Zara raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. Jun-Seok chuckled. Probably. He took a deep breath. Remember the promise I made when we were kids? Zara squinted at him. You made a lot of dramatic promises. Jun-Seok smiled. I said when I grew up, I would come back for you. Zara laughed. You did come back. Jun-Seok nodded slowly. Yes. But I don't think I finished that promise yet. Zara tilted her head. What are you talking about? Jun-Seok looked out at the city lights again. You'll see. Zara narrowed her eyes suspiciously. You're planning something. Jun-Seok didn't answer. He just smiled. And 2 weeks later, at the largest charity gala the city had ever hosted, he would finally reveal what that promise truly meant. But before we get to that moment, take 1 second to like the video and subscribe if you've been enjoying this story. And tell me in the comments, if you were Zara, would you have shared your lunch that day? Because the final part of this story is something even Zara never expected. Jun-Seok adjusted his tie for the 3rd time. Minho watched from the doorway and shook his head. You've spoken in front of presidents and billionaires, he said, but tonight you're nervous. Jun-Seok didn't deny it. Tonight is different. Minho leaned against the wall with a grin. Ah, so the mighty CEO is finally scared. Jun-Seok glanced at him. I'm not scared. You've checked your watch 10 times. Jun-Seok sighed. Okay, maybe a little. Minho laughed. Relax, it's just a charity gala. Jun-Seok looked toward the ballroom doors. It's not the gala I'm worried about. Minho crossed his arms. It's Zara. Jun-Seok nodded quietly. Inside the grand ballroom, hundreds of guests filled the room. Business leaders, government officials, celebrities. Large screens displayed the words, Red Thread Initiative Gala. At the center of it all was Zara. She stood surrounded by young people from the program. One girl hugged her tightly. Miss Zara, I got accepted into university, Zara gasped. You're serious? The girl held up her phone. I just got the email. Zara wrapped her arms around her. I'm so proud of you. Across the room, Jun-Seok watched. Minho stepped beside him. You see that? Jun-Seok nodded. She's the real hero here. Minho smirked. And yet, you're the one planning the big surprise. Jun-Seok exhaled slowly. Tonight is important. Minho studied him. You really love her, don't you? Jun-Seok didn't hesitate. Yes. Minho nodded. Then stop pacing and go stand on the stage. Jun-Seok chuckled. Bossy as always. The lights dimmed. A spotlight illuminated the stage. The host stepped up to the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate a movement that has already changed hundreds of lives. Applause filled the room. The host continued. In just 2 years, the Red Thread Initiative has helped over 800 young people find housing, education, and hope. Another wave of applause. And now, please welcome the man who helped make it possible. Mr. Park Jun-Seok. Jun-Seok walked onto the stage. The room erupted in cheers. Zara watched from her table, her expression proud but curious. Jun-Seok stood behind the microphone. For a moment he said nothing. Then he smiled. 22 years ago, I was a hungry kid sitting in an alley. The room grew quiet. I had nothing. He paused. No family, no home, no plan for tomorrow. Zara's eyes softened. Jun-Seok continued. Then a girl sat beside me. He held up his wrist. The faded red thread bracelet caught the light. She shared her lunch. The audience listened in silence. Jun-Seok looked toward Zara. She probably thought it was just food. Zara smiled slightly. But to me, it was proof that someone cared whether I lived or disappeared. A murmur moved through the room. Jun-Seok stepped away from the podium. Because of that moment, I made a promise. He walked slowly down the steps of the stage. I told her one day I would come back. The spotlight followed him across the room. Zara suddenly looked confused. Jun-Seok stopped in front of her table. The entire ballroom watched. He smiled gently. And I did. Some guests began whispering. Jun-Seok took Zara's hand. But there's something I never finished. Zara whispered, What are you doing? Jun-Seok chuckled softly, keeping the rest of my promise. Then he knelt. The room gasped. Zara's eyes widened. Jun-Seok pulled out a small velvet box. Zara Adeyemi, his voice was steady. You fed a starving boy when you barely had enough for yourself. Tears filled Zara's eyes. You believed in him before anyone else did. Jun-Seok opened the box. A ring sparkled under the lights. You changed my life. The entire ballroom was silent. So now I want to spend the rest of my life building something beautiful with you. Zara covered her mouth. Jun-Seok smiled. Will you marry me? For a moment Zara couldn't speak. The crowd waited. Minho whispered from the back. Come on. Zara laughed through her tears. You're unbelievable. Jun-Seok raised an eyebrow. Is that a yes? Zara nodded quickly. Yes. The room exploded with applause. Jun-Seok slipped the ring onto her finger. Zara pulled him into a hug. The crowd stood on their feet cheering. Some of the young people from the Red Thread program were crying. One boy whispered to his friend, This is like a movie. Minho wiped his eyes dramatically. I'm not crying, he muttered. It's allergies. Jun-Seok and Zara walked back onto the stage together. Zara leaned toward the microphone. I did not know he was going to do that. The crowd laughed. Jun-Seok shrugged. Surprises are good. Zara squeezed his hand. But he's right about one thing. The room quieted. This story didn't start with money. She looked around the ballroom. It started with kindness. Jun-Seok nodded. And kindness can come from anyone. Zara added softly. Even a little girl with a small lunchbox. The audience erupted in applause again. But the story wasn't over yet, because 1 year later, something even more beautiful would happen, and it would bring their story full circle in a way neither of them expected. If you've stayed with this story until now, take a second to like the video and subscribe because the final chapter is the most heartwarming part of all. The wedding didn't happen in a luxury hotel. It didn't happen in a palace. And it definitely didn't happen in one of Jun-Seok's expensive corporate buildings. Instead, Zara stood in the courtyard of a small elementary school. The same school where she had studied as a little girl. The same school only a few blocks away from the alley where everything began. Rows of white chairs filled the playground. Children from the Red Thread program ran around excitedly. Volunteers decorated the fence with small red ribbons. Minho stood near the stage, adjusting his suit nervously. One of the teenagers from the program nudged him. Why are you sweating more than the groom? Minho groaned. Because I had to organize this entire wedding. The teenager laughed. You're doing great. Minho sighed dramatically. I manage billion-dollar investments for a living, but this is the most stressful thing I've ever done. Across the courtyard, Jun-Seok stood near the entrance talking to one of the younger boys from the center. The boy tugged his sleeve. Mr. Park? Jun-Seok smiled. Yes? Is it true you used to be homeless? Jun-Seok nodded. Yes. The boy looked surprised. But now you're rich. Jun-Seok chuckled. That happened later. The boy looked thoughtful. Then maybe I can be rich someday too. Jun-Seok crouched down to his level. You can be anything you want. The boy smiled and ran off. Minho walked over, shaking his head. You're turning into a motivational speaker. Jun-Seok laughed. Maybe. Minho looked around the courtyard. Hard to believe all of this started with a lunchbox. Jun-Seok glanced toward the school gate. Not just a lunchbox. What then? A choice. Minho nodded slowly. You're right. At that moment, the music began to play. Everyone turned toward the entrance. Zara stepped through the gate. A simple white dress flowed softly as she walked forward. Her mother walked beside her, holding her arm proudly. The crowd stood up. Jun-Seok froze. Minho whispered, Close your mouth before a fly goes in. Jun-Seok ignored him. His eyes stayed on Zara. She looked both nervous and radiant. When she reached the front, she laughed softly. Why are you staring at me like that? Jun-Seok smiled. I'm making sure this is real. Zara grinned. It's real. The ceremony began. The officiant spoke warmly. Sometimes the smallest moments create the biggest stories. Guest nodded. Today, we celebrate a story that began with kindness. Zara glanced at Jun-Seok. And a promise. Jun-Seok squeezed her hand. When it was time for vows, Jun-Seok spoke first. 22 years ago, you sat beside a hungry boy in an alley. Zara smiled softly. You didn't see a stranger. You saw someone worth helping. His voice grew emotional. That moment changed everything for me. The crowd listened quietly. You taught me that kindness can build futures. Jun-Seok looked into her eyes. And I promised to spend the rest of my life building one with you. Some guests wiped away tears. Then Zara spoke. When I was 9, I never imagined that sharing lunch would lead to this. The crowd laughed softly. But life is strange like that. She lifted her wrist slightly. The red thread bracelet was still there. You kept your promise. Jun-Seok nodded. So now I promise something too. She smiled warmly. I promise that no matter how big the world becomes, we will always remember the little alley where this story began. Applause filled the courtyard. The officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, everyone leaned forward. I now pronounce you husband and wife. Cheers erupted. Jun-Seok kissed Zara as the crowd clapped loudly. Children threw small red ribbons into the air like confetti. Minho wiped his eyes again. Still, allergies, he muttered. Months passed. The Red Thread initiative continued expanding. More cities joined. More young people found housing, education, and support. One afternoon, Zara walked into Jun-Seok's office holding a small envelope. You need to see this. Jun-Seok looked up. What is it? Zara handed him the envelope. He opened it, then froze. Jun-Seok looked up slowly. Are you serious? Zara smiled. Yes. Jun-Seok laughed in disbelief. You're sure? Very sure. Jun-Seok stood up and hugged her tightly. You know what this means, right? Zara nodded. A new chapter. 9 months later, Jun-Seok stood in a hospital room holding a tiny baby in his arms. Zara lay on the bed smiling tiredly. Jun-Seok looked down at the baby girl. She's perfect. Zara laughed softly. You're biased. Jun-Seok shook his head. No. He gently tied a tiny red thread bracelet around the baby's wrist. Zara smiled. You're already starting the tradition. Jun-Seok nodded. Some promises should last forever. Years later, the Red Thread Initiative had helped thousands of young people. Programs existed in dozens of cities, but the story always began the same way, with a little girl, a hungry boy, and half of a lunchbox. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness can travel through time and return as something bigger than anyone imagined. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who believes kindness still matters. And tell me in the comments, what small act of kindness changed your life? Because you never know. Your story might be the next one that changes the world.